And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara Podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guests are Tobe Johnson and Brett Eichenberger, co-producer and director of the new documentary film A Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed. Tobe is the author of the Owl Moon Lab books and researcher of all things related to Bigfoot. With over a decade of research and his own experiences, he has dedicated his work to investigating the relationship of Sasquatch and the paranormal. Brett is an award-winning filmmaker with over 25 years of experience working in the film and video production industry. His work includes the feature films Light of Mine and Pretty Broken. He also does commercials, short films, music videos, and documentary shorts. Guys, thank you for being on our podcast today and welcome.
Thanks for having us, Jeff. Appreciate it.
So how did you guys hook up in the first place so you could make this film together?
So, I'll try and keep the long story short. But basically, Jill, the producer, and I decided that, when the pandemic started, we decided this is a great time for us with everything slowing down to do a Bigfoot documentary. This is something that we had talked about doing for years, almost a decade. And we'd done narrative films prior. And so we thought, what a better way to avoid people than to be out in the forest chasing, the ultimate social distancer himself. And so in June of 2020, we set out on our adventure and we started shooting at a little conference on the Oregon coast. Bigfoot conference is kind of an invite only. And we ended up meeting Daryl Adams, and we had recognized Daryl Adams from a documentary we had watched prior called Bigfoot Alien Connection. The Alien Bigfoot Connection, one or the other. Tobe can correct me. But we sat Daryl down, we interviewed him, and we talked to him. And we, at that point, had been very keen to contact Tobe and Daryl because they were local. Their story was incredible. And we thought, this is something we really want to, explore. And, their segment in that documentary was relatively short, maybe 10 minutes. And so we thought this is a great story for us. Let's get a hold of them. And so shortly thereafter, I contacted Tobe, and we quickly realized that Tobe was very connected within the world, the Bigfoot world, and / the paranormal kind of mysterious world. And so we thought, we need to bring him on as a co-producer on this film. He's got a tremendous amount to add to the product. So that's really how it began.
Tobe, can you tell us a little bit about that Bigfoot experience that you had?
Well, since the mid-2000s, the Bigfoot experiences have kind of overlapped and overlaid. And I've kept, diligent notes along the way here by having conferences, recording everything. We would have monthly meetups in the McKenzie Valley where we'd have witness testimony in a little mom and pa pizza parlor. And so it started off small, but along the way here, I got invested in looking at two particular types of research. Those would be the physical experiences and those who are saying there's something else going on. So the people involved in the world of Sasquatch research, you'll quickly learn, believe that there's a flesh and blood answer, and then there's this other category. And I tried to flush out just mainly over being frustrated. And I wanted to make the correct choice first, that the people that were saying that there are these stranger aspects to Sasquatch seem to have contact more often. And so they're very open. They would invite me out to their place, and they pretty much just gave me the keys to their kingdom, in this case, their backyard or the acreage behind them. And so those experiences started off with what I would call maybe incidental experiences where things would be moved, including large objects like, my tent put in a tree. That was pretty strange. That was one of the first moments of, me scratching my head saying, oh, wait a second. And then there were the gifts that would show up included in that, or strange stick structures that are placed at certain spots where you would find them, strange objects placed where you would find them. And then, of course, the sounds and what I would call maybe looking at shadows that shouldn't be there in the trees. So it started off with those, a little bit ambiguous at first, but then things snowballed into the phenomena, we'll call it, coming closer and closer to me and the witnesses. And that's where Brett and Jill came in to a place in Cottage Grove called the Al Moon Lab, where the Adams family, that's their real name, Daryl and Cindy Adams, had me basically live and research on their property for the better part of a year and a half.
Did you ever see Bigfoot yourself with your own eyes?
Well, the things that I've seen along the way here, I think maybe related to Bigfoot, but the closest I've ever come to actually seeing something happen at the Al Moon Lab. And in short, I had been waiting, like I said, for quite a while to have an experience like this. So I knew that the property I was at was probably going to yield a full-on sighting. So one night, on a moonless night, laying out on the gravel in a zero gravity chair, which is just an extended lawn chair behind my Jeep Commander, I saw what, in my opinion, could only be the legs of a Sasquatch standing behind my Jeep at about 40 feet away. And it noticed me just based upon the fact that I noticed it. And, it was all gravel in that area there. And I heard the slight crunch. I saw the foot extend and place itself in a reversal pose and then run away. But, if you're going to see Bigfoot, you might as well see its big feet. And so that's what I saw.
Now, when you saw it, what was your emotional reaction to it? Surprise, excitement, fear?
Yeah, I'm an adrenaline junkie. So for me, I was chasing that constantly, still am. And so for me, it was in a total, endorphin rush. And of course, fear, because, you're laying out there alone. You don't know what the move is going to be made. I'd come to kind of know the phenomena, maybe even know that Sasquatch that was looking at me, because we had a tremendous amount of forensic evidence, handprints, aspirations from sneezes on the property against the vinyl awning of my camper, hair samples, footprints, knee prints. And so we were kind of playing this cat and mouse game. And so I was ready for a full on visit and see, the full phenomena present itself. But I was certainly nervous about that moment. And when it left, I was kind of sad that I didn't get to see the whole thing.
There are a lot of Bigfoot documentaries out there. What makes your film different from the other ones?
So I think there's a variety of things that set us apart. One of the things that we wanted to do, we knew right off the bat, was to really show the character of Bigfoot. It was important to us to say that this is not some sort of a monster. This is not some sort of a threat. And it's not to say that they're not going to protect their own. And there are many, many witnesses that talk about feeling unwanted and being chased out of a certain area. And that makes sense. If you were to wander into somebody else's home, you'd get the same reaction. And that doesn't mean that the homeowner is not a nice person. So that's the first and foremost. The second thing I think that separates us is the fact that we really wanted to hone in on the emotional impact of the eyewitnesses and the psychology of the eyewitnesses in the hours and the days and the weeks that follow, sometimes months and years. And so we really get into that in the latter half of the film in the second act. And we talk to a Yale-educated psychologist by the name of Michael Adams. And Dr. Adams goes through the way that a brain processes a memory, processes a sighting, processes trauma. And in addition to Dr. Adams, we also talked to a hypnotherapist by the name of Doug Meacham, who does kind of the same thing. And obviously he puts somebody into under hypnosis, and he kind of goes back through that sighting of that individual. And the brain is kind of like an old VHS player. You can pause, you can rewind, you can fast forward. And these individuals are able to recount in detail their experiences, whether they're a few weeks or a few years or longer. So I think those are really two of the biggest components that really kind of set ourselves apart. The other is that we're much more of a traditional documentary in terms of traditional interviews as opposed to out in the field. There's some of that stuff in our documentary, but we really wanted to kind of hone in on the human experience.
One thing that I like about your trailer is that I guess you would say one of the interviewees that I saw recounted seeing a Sasquatch and its child together.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that because, in my opinion, if Bigfoot is there and not an alien or not a hologram, but there's a community of Bigfoot here, that means that there has to be a breeding population of them. So at least noting that there's a child there suggests that there is.
Yeah, I mean, that was something that really, that was the experience of Chad and Austin. Two friends that went up to a remote lake in extreme southern Oregon near the California border. And their intention was to do YouTube survival videos. So Chad's wife dropped them off. That's what they wanted. So they didn't have a vehicle. And then where she dropped them off, it's quite a bit of a hike. It's maybe 1.5 miles, nearly straight uphill, straight up a mountain to this lake. And so they were out there and doing these survival videos. They had made a camp up a slope about 150, 200 feet. Not a real easy hike to where their camp was. And they had left their cameras there and wandered down to the lake to do some fishing to try and catch some fish for the night and for a meal to make ends meet, as Austin says in the documentary. And while they were down there, they saw this thing on a log with, a smaller juvenile. And it really struck them how, and it says this in the trailer, this is no spoiler, how it moved its child behind it in order to protect it. This is new. I have not heard of any sightings, and I'm sure there's something out there, but I personally have not heard of any sightings where we see that kind of protective mechanism, like, a father would do or a mother would do for a child if they didn't want that, child to see something, or maybe it was too young to know about the human existence. I don't know, but I felt like there was a great deal of humanity there, a great deal of sentience and intelligence, and I think that says a lot. And the fact that Chad and Austin were together really helps, quantify that sighting as well. I mean, both of those guys were really emotionally changed by that experience.
Tobe, you mentioned earlier the sounds of Bigfoot. Are you talking about the sounds that you hear them walking, or sounds that that it actually makes, grunting, moaning, screaming type of sounds?
Right. There's a whole discipline to breaking down this audio, and we were basically in the school of hard knocks figuring out how to record sound, in particular with the little Tascam DR05 recorders that I don't leave home without. And we had those placed all around the property. So it was a multidisciplinary thing that went on for over 1,400 hours by the end of it all. And so what we found is that whatever was approaching this gravel driveway was very careful when it did it, because sometimes it didn't make sound, but yet it would come up to the recorder, which was really impossible for us to do. Certainly something over 1,000 pounds on 2 legs or 4 legs to do. And so, yeah, when I say vocalizations or sounds, I mean something more than grunts and groans. It gets into whistles. It gets into mimicry. It gets into language. Language, let's just stop there. I think that language between Bigfoots or big feet exist. And they have to be in a group of 2 or more before they do it. So I think there's examples of that in the audio we have in our book, at least. certainly if you go back and hear other witness testimony about Bigfoot language, one of the people that speak about this and friend of mine is Ron Moorhead, where a group of hunters in the high Sierras over a prolonged period of time went to debunk the Bigfoot evidence that they were gathering at their remote hunting site. And included in that is more forensic anomalies of what is an unknown language. And how do we know it's a language? Well, because there's something called morphine streams. And that gets into understanding this partner of his, Scott Nelson, who's a Navy cryptolinguist. So in concert over the last 30 or 40 years, right, Brett, Ron has really come back with tangible evidence. It's never really been debunked by anybody with a degree that have taken apart Ron's stuff and said, you know, that's been fake, that's been hoaxed, or it's misunderstood. There's something there, because after you've been going at it as hard as I have for the better part of 15 years, I've played these sounds before for people, you know, and put the cans over their ears at a Bigfoot event. And you watch a grown man well up in tears because it's been years since they've heard validation that they heard that sound that one day in the woods. And these people, and Brett can explain this further, these are lifelong hunters. That is their passion, you know, just as much as it is for somebody to go to church. These guys go grab their bow and their rifle and they head to go hunting. And for someone to give that up, it's a big deal. And, you know, there's a little bit of remorse, I'm sure, when those tears come down, but there's also validation that they heard what they heard.
Are you saying that they're general hunters, like deer hunters, and they're giving that up, or they're Bigfoot hunters?
Oh, no. Definitely just general sportsman hunters, people that, you know, are hunting bear or deer or something that effect, or duck or whatever, even fishermen. And they've given up that passion. They're not Bigfooters at all. They've only maybe seen or heard something in particular, but it's such a profound, life-altering, shifting moment for them that it is like a religious experience or like a near-death experience. After I was reviewing some of your videos here, the profound nature of having an ND, I've talked to these people as well. They will never forget that day. And from that moment, they look at their life completely different. And it may shift things around as far as priorities are concerned. They're not neatly put inside a box anymore. And they have to live in these gray areas like, well, what is life? What is this? And a Bigfoot witness is just the same. And that's the neat thing about this film, is that you sit one-on-one as an audience member and that witness, and they fill the screen and they tell you what happened. And I get goosebumps even explaining it.
You know, these are family traditions with these hunters. So this isn't just, this is a big deal, because we're talking about brothers, cousins, uncles, fathers, grandfathers that are trying to pull these guys that have had these experiences back out into the woods, and they won't go. You know, Chad faced this. Chad was a hunter who I just spoke about, and he was getting calls all the time from friends and relatives to go out hunting, and he wouldn't go. And that's really when it started to click with his wife, because she was skeptical at first, but she really started realizing very quickly that if he's not going hunting, then this really happened to him. So it's you know, the emotional response by some of these men, like Tobe was saying, that are crying, is, to me, pretty profound evidence. And, you know, people say, well, yeah, it's anecdotal, but not with that kind of an emotional response. You know, there was a short series called Sasquatch. It was on Hulu. And for the most part, I thought it was kind of a throwaway series. But it's kind of about the drug trade in Humboldt County, California. And they kind of like fooled the audience, and they interviewed some people that had Bigfoot experiences. And really, the documentary series is not really about Bigfoot. It's kind of a bait and switch. But in that film, they interviewed a man who was a former police officer and I believe he was out fishing, and the guy just starts bawling on camera, about what he saw and how he'll never forget that day and how it impacted him so much. I mean, if there's any reason to watch that series, it's that guy's testimony. And this is not uncommon. You know, Amy Boo, who was on Coast to Coast AM last night, as a matter of fact, talked about in our film how she would go to sportsmen's shows and she'd set up a table, you know, that would say something like, if you've had a Bigfoot experience, I want to talk to you. And these guys would come in, you know, in 3s, 4s, 5s. They're buddies. You know, they're tough. They come in and they'd look at it and, oh, yeah, ha, 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 and they'd walk by. And then like 15, 20 minutes later, one of the guys would kind of sneak back and look around and say, look, I'm so glad you're here. I've got to talk to you, but I can't do it right now in front of my friends. You know, but I have this profound sighting, and then they'll connect offline. So, I mean, this is real. This is real when you've got these kinds of guys, these macho, tough guys that have been doing this again, like as a family tradition, and they're having these experiences. Yeah, there's something definitively going on.
Why do you think they have such a strong emotional reaction? Is it due to the shock or the surprise of seeing it, or is it fear? And to follow that up, is that why they won't go back out hunting again, because they're so afraid of seeing it?
I think it's a combination of, I think it starts off as fear and turns into shock. I think there's a various bunch of emotions. Rich Germeau in the documentary talks about how he went from really kind of shock and awe to anger because he felt betrayed, because he felt like he had been lied to, that, you know, somebody wasn't telling him truth. He was brought up in the traditional education system and it failed him, because if these things are real, somebody's got to know about them. And why aren't they telling them? Why aren't they telling the public? For other folks, it's a situation where, you know, they have this sighting of this thing that is obviously the apex predator, and they see the muscle. They see, you know, a figure that's 8-9 feet tall, you know, that's bigger than any, you know, human being in history, and they know immediately that this thing could, with, you know, essentially a flick of the fingers, could kill them, rip them apart. You know, and so I think that, you know, as humans, we still have our, you know, primordial instincts, this fight or flight kind of instincts. And I think that that's where that fear really boils up, because you just don't know. You don't know what's going to happen. But what you do know is what you're looking at is capable of killing you without much effort.
Just to reiterate that fear part there, I don't necessarily think the witnesses know the full ramifications of what's happened to them. And partly it's due to the fact that there's this division that automatically happens with the witness and their worldview, because you no longer fit into that box anymore, as I was explaining. And in that box is your secure world, your wife, your family, the dynamic, the church, the job, all those things fit neatly in that worldview. And I think that fear is an instinct that's like, oh no, I'm being pulled out of this safety zone of this network of people that understand me. And you get that from Rich plainly. There's this anger, just like, I don't want this to happen. I don't want to know, you know, I do want to know about this, but how am I going to approach this as a previous lawman? How do I look at this? Because it's not just, you know, what we described here, none of these are scary encounters. It's literally the rug getting pulled out underneath these people. You know, I've been chasing this myself, right? These people, a lot of them haven't. They happened upon these rabbit holes, and some have chosen to go down into these rabbit holes, and others are, you know, if you ask them, they say they would never want to do it again. And you get that impression off a couple of these witnesses as well. So, you know, that's the tricky part about this thing, is when you get to know these witnesses, it's hard to get into the nitty gritty, even though I think that's where this documentary kind of, it's leaning on the edge of where to go with these witnesses and what the family dynamics are, and you get a sense of it. And, but in my case, yeah, it divided some relationships I had, some of them temporarily and some of them long-term. And at a certain point, you just have to decide what's more important. Truth. Are you going to let the truth just remain a memory, or are you going to pursue this truth? Either way, it's true.
So after your encounter, how did you change as a person?
Well, it wasn't so much what I described as an encounter in Cottage Grove at the Al Moon Lab. What really changed me and my priorities was seeing, and we get into this in the second half, was the supernatural that is involved with pursuing this phenomena. And once I saw that unfold in front of me and another witness, that's my, Rich Germeau moment, where it's just like, oh my gosh, it's all of this is true. It's not, I don't have to make up stories in order for this to be real. I can go to this place and I can have a fairly inexplicable magical experience on top of all this Bigfoot stuff. And I won't get into it all, but in short, there's some things that happen when you go Bigfooting that are just otherworldly. And most of these people, we call them apers, people that think this is only an ape or a hybrid, or Gigantopithecus is another word they use, or relic hominid. They use Newtonian science to explain all this. And that gets in the way of this other stuff that happens to them. Although they'll cling to the story that they, can explain all this through Newtonian science, they will just totally omit the more magical stuff that happens in the woods when you're around Bigfoot.
After watching this film, will the average viewer come to the conclusion that yes, Bigfoot is real?
That's a great question. I'd like to think so. I know that, yes, there will be some people. We have had some people that have really kind of had that paradigm shift. Some of the audience, it depends on, their background. And, we all, as audience members, we all bring our own life experience into the film, and there's a saying in Hollywood that nobody ever sees the same film. So, if you're a tried and true skeptic, you're probably going to come out maybe, with some different thoughts. But we go into this a little bit into the psychology of somebody that has a rigid, inside the box perspective in life. It's going to be difficult to change that perspective. We hope to move the needle with some of those folks because we really want to show the data, and we do show the data. We interviewed Scott Tompkins with Bigfoot Mapping Project, and we're looking at points on a map of a Bigfoot sighting or a track or a sound, one of the three. And, the continental United States is lit up like a Christmas tree of all of these dots. And I feel like it's pretty easy to ask the question, is each and every single one of those something other than a Bigfoot? Because if the answer is no, then Bigfoot exists. And we're talking about tens of thousands of reports, of eyewitness reports, some of them great, some of the class A, as they say, and some of them, not so great. Maybe they heard a weird noise and they reported it. But for every single one of those points on the map that's been cataloged, there's how many other thousands that haven't been reported? The majority of the witnesses that we interviewed in this film, they're not on that map. They didn't report it. They're reporting it in our film, but they didn't report it to that database. So, we're now talking about statistics. We're talking about math. We're talking about numbers, and the data tells the story, and we really press that. So I would really challenge a skeptic to come back and explain that away. It's really difficult to do. And the reason why we're doing a chapter 2 that discusses the paranormal is because the paranormal is no different. It's no different in regards to a lot of these Bigfoot sightings. There's a paranormal component to it. And the data backs it up, there. So yeah, there's some fascinating hard numbers out there that I think people really need to take a closer look at.
In your opinion, are the Bigfoot a living community that is here on the planet, 24 hours a day, or do you think that they're interdimensional beings that kind of come and go, or something else?
Tobe?
Thanks a lot. I know, right? Well, there's a lot of head scratchers when it comes to Bigfoot stuff. And what I'll say is that they do whatever they want. I don't think that we're going to get to the bottom of this with a documentary. I don't know what science already knows about this. I feel as though they probably know a lot just based upon what's going on with the UFO stuff. And the fact is they're not coming to guys like me to ask questions. So it's a tricky thing. I mean, I used to say that, not having a body is the evidence that there's something else going on. The lack of evidence is evidence. Now, I don't know if that fully fits the story as much anymore, because there seems to be evidence of anomalies around their areas, things that you can measure, things that you can see. Now that we have FLIR camera, I think that kind of ties them up a little bit. Like, we're getting evidence on FLIR in a way that we could never get evidence before with cameras, although they seem to know perfectly well what a camera is and electronics in general. They seem to know intent. They seem to know motives. They seem to know about man's ego, which I know sounds kind of bizarre. But if we're talking about a type of people, it's a different quantity of sorts. They've had longer to think about this and less distraction. And so for that, there's a lot we could learn. I don't think we are. I think some people have learned how to be more like them and perhaps sit around a campfire with them. And we haven't got those testimonies on film yet, but I've certainly talked to witnesses who say as much. But to answer your question, do they go into a portal? I haven't seen a Bigfoot do it, so I don't know.
From what you both are suggesting, not only are they bigger than us, but to me it sounds like they must be more intelligent than us, because one, they're still, able to be elusive from us, as well as, as you were saying, if they know our intent, they know about all these electronics.
I just think that they're more connected. They seem to be a part of the environment in a way that we're just not. And maybe it's due to the distractions, things that are simple for us to understand, like a cell phone. However, there is this, I use this analogy. I don't know if this works for everybody, but a human in their environment, especially with the electronics, is tantamount to a tiny sliver that you can't really see, but you can feel it, and you want to pick it out. And I think that's how they respond to us most of the time. Now, they seem to tolerate us more when they come to us, and maybe they're the sliver in our hand. But that seems to be the way it goes, is that they have a limited amount of attention that they want to focus in on you when you're in their habitat. Mostly they're getting out of the way and moving on. I mean, any of the photographic or video evidence that we have seems to show them fleeing. Certainly not a monster in the woods chasing them down, but that's I think that's possible. I don't say that's not possible. I don't think they're a big Harry and the Henderson situation at all. They're an alpha predator, an ambush predator with the attributes of humanity attached to them.
It's interesting that you brought that up, because I don't know of any reports of Bigfoot or big feet, not sure how you pluralize that, but attacking humans. Is there?
Yeah.
There's kidnappings. There's been some documented kidnapping case, with the most famous one being Albert Ostman. And he's got quite a story. I would encourage viewers to look up Albert's story. This is back in, I believe, the 1920s in Canada. I'm not aware of any. I think there was a rumor at one point that Sasquatch attacked somebody and ripped an arm off. Tobe might know more about that. I have heard a story that there was a man who fell in the forest. He had an accident and he was awoken by a Sasquatch, as if the Sasquatch was caring for them. And the man had a gun and pulled the gun on the Sasquatch just because he had just kind of woke up and was shocked at what he was seeing. And the Sasquatch kind of let out a cry, a wail, and then took off into the woods. I have heard that story, and I think that's a real story. So yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Tobe might have more to add to that.
Most of this seems like teenage gamesmanship or like a fraternal order initiation of some kind. And the natives would talk about that at great length when I got involved with this. That's the trickster element of the hairy man. And so that's been my experience, is that you have this trickster, prankster element to the phenomena. One of the things that happened to us and has happened to me privately, but in particular regarding the Al Moon Lab, is that we would have things run up behind us or between us in the gravel yard on two legs. And it was unmistakably a large bipedal. It was a human type something that you could not see, but it was plain as day that it was running between you and getting as close to you as it could before it fled into the trees. And I'm talking less than 2 feet away. And you'll hear those kind of stories all the time from people that are invested in this as only Newtonian science or flesh and blood answers. And they'll just pass it off and say, well, I'm a trained observer, but I missed the hairy beast that time and it got away from me. No, this happens in the daytime too. That excuse doesn't fly, especially for daytime stuff. So that's been my experience with it.
What do you think is the most compelling evidence in your film?
Oh boy. We had a lot of compelling evidence, in my opinion. We have a photograph from Central Oregon coast from a wildlife cam that we do a measurement on that is pretty incredible. Quite honestly, I think that the best evidence is really going back to Patty. And we talked to a man named Henry Franzoni, who in the late 90s was paid a significant amount of money with other scientists to debunk the Patterson-Gimlin film, and they couldn't do it. And this was really cutting edge technology at the time. And technology, even to this day, as you're able to up-res that film footage into 4K and really get into it, technology is really doing us all a favor in proving that Patty was most likely indeed an actual Sasquatch. And so we talk about that in the film, and we go into that in depth. We talk about how, they were able to observe muscles moving underneath the skin, and how there's a forgetting the name of it right now, but it's a point at the back of the skull that the muscles connect, that show that it's more of a hominoid than it is an ape. So I think that is some really compelling evidence in the way that we break that down. There's another case that was investigated in Florida by Diane Stocking-Neese, where there was skin residue. You can see the fur that was left on a window down in Florida of a Bigfoot that was peering into a window. So we've got some photographs of that. And again, I think the emotional testimony of the eyewitnesses is, if you were to throw Bigfoot into court, I think you'd have a conviction that Bigfoot was real based on some of this eyewitness testimony. So I think all in all, we've got quite a bit of compelling evidence.
I'm in Texas, and I don't know if there are any Bigfoot sightings here. Maybe if there are, it's probably up in northeast Texas, where it's more of a wooded area. But in Oregon or Washington or Northern California, are there any laws that protect Bigfoot?
Yes, there's a law in Skamania County, Washington, as a matter of fact, that protects Bigfoot. And it's changed over the years, but I think, don't quote me on this, but I think it's pretty close to a murder charge if you kill one. There was a law here in Oregon. I don't know if it still stands, and I don't know that it was that significant. There's Whatcom County, Washington State, which is near Bellingham, or Bellingham, I think, is in Whatcom County, has been designated a Sasquatch sanctuary. So yeah, there's definitely some laws that have been passed. I would like to see, any and every state that has had a Sasquatch sighting pass a law that protect these beings.
How close do you think we are to finally capturing one?
I'll pass that ball to Tobe.
I don't know if we haven't already. I don't know how that would work. Maybe not accidental. Maybe one was given to the government. You hear stories about that all the time. Certainly, I have a friend of mine, Jerry Hine, who's pulled a couple fast ones on the 911 system to see if they'll respond quickly to, in this case, pull off a staged event of him hitting a Sasquatch on the highway, and then him hiding in the brush to see if 911 actually shows up to retrieve a body. And according to Jerry, some men in black or blacked out SUVs came to grab whatever evidence wasn't there. So that points to the fact that maybe they have these cleanup teams. See, our issue is again, we have to talk about UFOs here when we talk about Bigfoot. Does the government have crash retrieval? Do they have more than granules of alien craft material? And I think that they probably have that. I mean, they're basically admitting to the public here slowly with little dribs and drabs that we have contact with something else. And I think that day will come for Bigfoot. You probably shouldn't have the Sasquatch DNA in and around your facility or house or acreage, according to Native Americans, including Mel Scahan, who's Yakima Native American in our film. He spoke, and I don't know if he'll speak more in part 2, but speaks about the consequences of having a body, the consequences of having Sasquatch hair. And there it gets into more of a spiritual, supernatural consequence of having latent Sasquatch DNA in and around you. So if that's true, if the government does have stuff like that, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a little bit of unique things happening in and around that poor body.
And just to add to that real quick, Jeff, we get into this in the documentary, and we interview a gentleman who is a former Army intelligence analyst. And I think people are going to be surprised to hear what he has to say. I'll leave it at that.
All right. So we know Tobe's had an actual sighting of one. For you, Brett, what was it that convinced you that Bigfoot was real? Is it one actual event or just the combination of all the events from your film?
It's a great question. For me, it was the eyewitness testimony. I just feel like I've always had a great instinct as to tell when someone is lying, telling the truth. And again, we're talking about massive numbers of individuals that are telling the same story. And we're talking about people who have had very detailed descriptions of what they've seen. And I don't trust everybody immediately. Sometimes it takes some thought, but I do believe these people. I do believe that they've seen something. And everything else that we've found throughout the process of doing this documentary is just really kind of firmed up those beliefs, from the structures to something we're going to get into the second chapter, the gifting. There's just too much, in my opinion, too much evidence to refute the existence of Bigfoot.
Again, since I live in Texas, we don't generally talk about Bigfoot down here. I would probably say the most paranormal thing we talk about here is the chupacabra, which is like some kind of goat monster animal. But up there in Oregon, Washington, Northern California, is Bigfoot really popular among the community? And is it something that's commonly talked about? Or is it still kind of talked about, only in in groups behind closed doors and kind of, frowned upon?
I'll answer that and I'll let Tobe kind of finish up. But yes, I mean, we joke that our movie stars an A-list movie star who doesn't make a single appearance in the film. They're very popular in the Pacific Northwest, and I'd say all the way down to probably the Bay Area of California. You see cars with stickers on them. You see people wearing their T-shirts. When you're at the Portland International Airport, they've got all kinds of Sasquatch memorabilia for sale. Same thing with Seattle. I think that people just really are endeared to this local myth, legend, whatever they want to call it. We know it's real. He's kind of a mascot, I guess you could say, of the Pacific Northwest. And it's part of our culture, and it's been part of the culture of the indigenous folks for thousands of years. So I only see that growing as more and more people come forward with their stories. Part of the reason that we did this documentary is we wanted to normalize the conversation. If you've had a sighting of Bigfoot, it should be okay to talk about it. There shouldn't be a ridicule. So yeah, again, I'll let Tobe kind of sum up, from his perspective.
Yeah, it's an interesting quandary because you have something cute and cuddly that you can make a stuffed animal out of, and I could see why people do it, and they're so unique looking. As far as the giggle factor associated with it, I don't really know what to think of that, because there seems to be, there's this majesty and this reverence to these sightings. I mean, you have families that have been divided over their sighting and such. So what do you do with something like that? Do you make a magnet out of it? Do you make a coloring book? Do you sell jerky with it? I guess you do if you don't believe it to be real. And then I say that and I make wood sculptures out of them. So for me, I'm a walking contradiction. And, maybe part of me is a little resentful over those wood watchers, I call them, that I carve. But yeah, it's a difficult one for me, because I think eventually it's going to be, the tide's going to turn and people will come to see that this phenomena is very real, like UFOs and the abduction scenarios with the Greys and Ghost, of course. I think it fits into that category. And, most people believe in ghosts, by the way. You can't find really anybody who doesn't believe in the spirit world anymore. They have one factor of it or one story. But when it comes to this, it's just such an outlandish thing. And so for that, I could see why, we have lots of patents in China.
Do you carve these Bigfoots because it's an obsession? Kind of like the character in Close Encounters, where he keeps making Devil's Tower out of mashed potatoes?
That's how my book opens, to the story of Roy Neary. And so this obsessive quality to making effigies of Sasquatch, looking for them, talking about them, your network of friends, your girlfriend, everything networked around Bigfoot, maybe is viewed as unhealthy for a lot of people. And there is this balancing act of like, well, how much of this has gotten into my life? What have I stopped doing and now become obsessed with doing? So, I talk to those people as an interviewer myself, and now as an author, and sitting down with them, you have to kind of hold a mirror up to yourself and say, okay, how much of this has gotten in the way? But in this case, I find that it's only really amped up the good qualities in myself, because it really is a self-reflection pursuit. If you can get over the fact that you're maybe not going to have a Bigfoot sighting that day in the woods, and get into the fact that, oh, this is all about losing ego, which is a big jump. I understand that. But in the end, that's what all this really is about, is the shedding of the flesh and the shedding of ego. And again, why are we all here? The profound nature of what we're actually looking for may be way beyond Sasquatch.
Where can we watch the movie?
So A Flash of Beauty is available on Amazon. You can rent it on YouTube, Vimeo, Vudu, Google Play, and the Microsoft Store. And it is available in certain countries internationally. I know Canada and the UK are two countries that's available. We've been getting commentary from folks in Germany. So I believe it's available there. So it's out there. It's not too hard to find. If you just Google A Flash of Beauty, you should be able to come up with various places to watch it.
I keep hearing you guys mention part 2. Is it already in production?
Yes. So part 2 is mostly shot. We do have some more things that we need to film over the summer to add to it, but we expect to have that out within, I'd say, the next 9 to 12 months.
As a filmmaker, I'm just curious, have you had a lot of success with it that it compels you to do more movies about this?
Yes. I think the response has been really tremendous. The controversy notwithstanding, we've had, great feedback. I feel like, we're a fresh voice in the genre, and we want to, push this issue. We want more people to up their game, if you will. So yeah, I feel like it's starting to make a difference. And it's going to take some time, I think, but, going forward, we have talked about doing some additional pieces after the sequel. One of the conversations is doing a documentary about Ron Moorhead and his experiences. He's been doing this for over 40 years. So over 50 years, I'm sorry, over 50 years, 1971. So there's that conversation, and or just doing a documentary on somebody who's had multiple encounters. We know individuals that are in their 50s and 60s that have had these encounters with families and clans since they were 4 or 5 years old. So that's a potential documentary. So there is a wealth of stories and individuals that we could concentrate on and tell their stories.
We mentioned your book earlier, Tobe. Is that available on Amazon?
It is, yeah. It's called The Al Moon Lab, a Paranormal Experiment, and it's an interactive book. So as you read along, you actually scan QR codes embedded in the page that are associated with the chapter, and then you can actually go to the scene as it unfolds, because we had our smartphones at the ready and a lot of audio that we can share and forensic evidence.
Oh, that's pretty awesome. So are you working on a second book?
I'm toying around with it now, maybe a co-author as well. And we'll see where that goes. But I'm kind of leaning towards understanding these peripheral issues a little more that involve Sasquatch, including these possible window areas or portal areas and people that have maybe interacted or gone into them.
Do you guys have anything else that you're working on that you want us to know about?
This is it for us. We are focused 100% on bringing the sequel to folks as soon as we can.
All right. Well, before we finish up, can you leave us with one last positive message about Bigfoot?
I think in some ways, Bigfoot might be an ambassador to the mysteries of the universe.
I like that.
We said it at the same time. I
Right.
like that. Well, guys, thank you so much for being my guest today. I really appreciate you both, and I wish you massive success with both of your films.
Thank you, Jeff. Really appreciate you having us on.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.
You too. Take care.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.